At the end, it's been a long day, but a constructive day, I think. So we hope that this will make for an interesting end to the discussions today. My name is Dr. Andre. I'm from the Wilfrid Martens Centre, and I'm Senior Research Officer covering Economic and Social Policy. The panel here today is titled Holding the Centre, Restoring an Aspirational Middle Class in Europe. And I want to thank Agrarian and the CDA Research Institute in the Netherlands for organising this panel today. This panel also marks the launch of the Martens Centre CDA KAS collaborative publication, No Robots, the position of middle-class households in 9 European countries, which forms part of a wider Martens Centre campaign considering, I suppose, the middle-class issue or policy priorities for the 2019 elections when it comes to the middle class. At this stage, I'll just very briefly introduce our panel, and then we can get straight to it. I'll give the panelists an initial contribution. Dr. Arjen Sigman, who's Associate Professor of Finance at the Free University of Amsterdam, an economist at the CDA Research Institute. He's a co-editor of our No Robots publication. His initial contribution will focus on some of the key findings from the book. On my right is Dr. Rumiana Stolova, excuse my terrible Bulgarian, Professor of Sociology and Director at the Institute for the Study of Societies and Knowledge at the Bulgarian Academy of Sciences. She's also a contributor to our publication. And finally, on my extreme right, we have Juha Pekka-Norvala. He's Acting Head of Unit for Policy and Strategy in the EPP, and he also has significant experience looking at economic and social policy within the EPP family. So, Arjen, I don't think I won't kind of make any introductory comment. I'll allow you to do that as part of the book.
I'll stand there then, yeah?
Yeah, you can stand or sit, whatever you want. And expect me to come after you after about 14, 15 minutes.
Okay, yeah, well, okay. I think 10 minutes will be enough.
Perfect.
Okay, well, thanks everybody who's here. So this book is a nice product. It's also a product of the Martens Centre, who helped organize a workshop a year ago. Now I remember during this workshop, we're there with these 9 researchers, and halfway the day we're completely confused. Now that's the idea of a workshop, that questions are raised. That it's not just saying, well, we're going to give the standard answers, but we want to find out questions. So that can mean that halfway the day you find out actually there are a lot of questions and answers we don't know. So I thought that was good. And so one of the things is that, how do you measure middle class? It's very easy to say, and we formulated a proposal, of course, saying we want to study the middle class in Europe. But how do you measure that? And what is that middle class? And the way I say it was the discussion, which I think we used in a good way, because at the end of the day, and halfway, we realized, well, these are the questions we have to answer. This is the project itself. What is the middle class? And not just look at the numbers. So let's find the right group of people. No, but just say, you know, we want to find out where is the average household. A change in focus. So not look at from the top down, like how are things going macroeconomically in Germany or Bulgaria, but how is the perspective of the household, of the family. And then you need to, well, just not look at one family, but a couple. So you define an interval of people. And that's what we did. So that was also the first lesson. And I think it's also the lesson of this book, is that it's not so much study number 10 about the middle class, but it's also a change in focus of looking at countries and looking at these countries in Europe and how people perceive it. Now, part of it is numbers, especially chapter, so if you want to get a quick overview, chapter 2 is numbers. Here's some graphs, size of the middle class, growth of income. And what was interesting when we started also, there was an expert, a Belgian expert, Yves Marx, not the family of Karl. Mm-hmm. And I said to him, well, is it going to be hard to get these numbers on the middle class? And then he said, and he's written a lot of papers on it. He said, well, you can find it from the OECD. There's this big book that I worked on, Middle Class in Europe, it was called. Very big book. And then he said, but actually, the numbers in the first chapter are probably not correct in that book. Because he saw that there were numbers for Belgium on income growth, which could not be true. So I thought that was interesting. It was interesting because I could do it right. It was also interesting because it shows you that you have to take care, you have to be very careful with the numbers. Lies, damn lies, and statistics. So check and double check what we're going to put in the book, in the numbers. So nobody pointed me at mistakes yet, but so I would recommend, especially this chapter 2 on the numbers, they are checked and double checked. So if you get a good idea of these countries cover 2/3 of Europe, 2/3 of GDP, 2/3 of the population, of how middle classes in each country have fared in terms of size and income, you can see it there. So to give you a few highlights, like if you look at the size of the middle class, that varies between. It of course depends on the measure of income that you use, but it varies between 56, 69% of the population. The Netherlands is the biggest, 69%. You also saw the middle class increasing in Ireland and Poland. There you see the middle class growing, and you see it shrinking somewhat in Germany, Bulgaria, and Finland. And what's even what's interesting to see also is if you look at income growth of the median family. So the median is like the person in the middle, this household in the middle, which is like in Bulgaria, 34%. I hear a bit of echo. Okay, so 34% income growth in 8 years in total, Bulgaria. Poland 24%. So these seem to be the big winners in Europe in the past 10 years. Ireland, Italy, Spain, -6, -8, -9%. So these countries were really hurt by the crisis. And I think what we learned from this is that you might stop here and say, okay, so these are the numbers. There's a problem there, or there is a great success there. But actually, there's something else going on. And you see this in the chapters, which is that it's not just income. For example, you see that the household size changes. So if you measure this income over the household and you correct for the size, then it will depend also on the household size, which also changes over this time. Households change, they adapt. Or look at the labor market, where you see that there's a change in the labor market, more short-term contracts in some countries. Maybe people work harder. So what does it mean if the income growth is stable, but some people work harder and some people don't work harder? I mean, that's a huge difference. And you don't see that in the numbers. At least it's difficult to see in the numbers. So I thought this was another insight, that these statistics, there's this phrase, lies, damned lies, and statistics. Maybe you could say statistics are biased by definition because they are numbers. And we do not live in a number world. We live in a world of stories, or who we are. And at the moment you look at the numbers, and I like to look at numbers, I'm an economist, you should not lose the perspective of the story, which is what is going on. And in this case, households adapt to that. That's also why we call it no robots. People are not robots. They are afraid of robots. Will there be work in the future? But it's also the case that they don't want to be treated as robots. Like your income growth is good. Let's take the example of Poland or Bulgaria. Income growth is high. But still people have the same worries, or maybe even more worries than in other countries. And this means that there's much more going on than just numbers and income growth. Finally, so what's the European connection? Because you could take 9 random countries in the world. Why is it different than taking 9 European countries? Well, because we are in Europe, we're together. And what you see is how incredibly diverse these countries are. So in each chapter we ask the same kind of questions. There are statistical questions about income growth, size of the middle class, but also questions about education opportunities. What happens to households? Are there generation effects? These are things we also ask. And then you see that in each country there are different things going on. But what strikes me the most is this. So there's something called the Easterlin Paradox. That's from an economist. I think he was at the World Bank. I'm not sure at the time, in the 70s. He asked the question, are you happier if you have a higher income? So he compared a couple of countries, and then he found out that happiness in these countries was not related to their income. That's why they called it a paradox, which seems a paradox because we all want to be richer. Now, later research showed that actually the data was a bit flawed, and there is a relation between wealth and happiness. But still, it's named the Easterlin Paradox. In this book, you might see it as the East-West Paradox. So a lot of income growth in Bulgaria and Poland, but people are not extremely cheerful, saying, oh, we are winners, this is the European dream, everything is going well. No, because they compare themselves to Western Europe, because they see things that are not in order. So that is a paradox. And I think it means something for Europe. That's why it's interesting that it's in one book, which is that we want to improve trade and people moving across borders, but at the same time it creates tensions. And we'll probably debate this in this session. I think this is an issue. And it is an issue of people living their life in their own country, but now because of Europe, they can compare themselves to other people. And you can do the comparison by reading the book, which I recommend. And that's my introduction. Thank you.
Thank you, Arjen. I think that was a very good introduction into, I suppose, the main finding, I guess, which is really that the middle class issue, if you want to call it that. Some people have problems with defining the middle class. But really, I think from the political perspective, it's about the economic situation now is growth, employment are increasing, but still there's this feeling that a lot of working middle class people, they've lost faith in their ability to achieve a higher standard of living, certainly for their kids, and to match the social mobility achieved by preceding generations. In a sense that the aspirations of the middle class are getting harder to achieve, even though we have all this technology and we have all these opportunities. It's very hard to see that in day-to-day life. So that's where I'd like to bring in our Bulgarian expert. And I'd like to particularly ask you about the situation in Bulgaria, because as Arjen said, if you looked at the numbers, you would say, high income growth, things are going well. But really, I think in your presentation, which are available, I've printed off a couple of copies here at the front, they're available for anybody who's interested. Maybe you could really focus on what are the key drivers of middle class dissatisfaction. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
First of all, I would like to thank you for inviting me to take part in this panel discussion. Second, I have to say that Bulgarians are very optimistic and trust the European Union. We are together with Romania, the two countries that were integrated to EU in the second wave in 2007. And still the optimism prevails before Euroscepticism. But yes, middle class has several reasons to be disappointed and to be very weak. And in several cases, the situation of the low middle class is not that different compared to low income groups. I'm a sociologist and I am interested in differences and in inequalities. So we started with my co-author with statistics, with income definition of the middle class. But afterward, we are really interested in the internal differentiations in the middle class. We analyzed the generational discrepancies, regional dispersion of the middle class, the employment security and the unemployment risk, the middle class, and the perspective of the occupational groups. Why this is important? First, studying middle class and the income differences is important from political point of view. We see that satisfaction with democracy is connected to income classes. Middle class and upper class are more satisfied with democracy, trust more to European institutions and trust more to national institutions. So that's one political reason in having a strong and wide middle class. Something what was mentioned in the previous panels was that trust to European institutions is higher compared to the national institutions. So European institutions are seen as a garant against corruption performed on national level. Then, when we speak about income, yes, there is increase of the income levels in Bulgaria during the 10 years period of EU membership. But still, Bulgaria has a low median annual household income. And this raises the question about the discrepancies between European countries. Having in mind open market and choice and freedom of movement, that raise several questions. For example, brain drain, and that leads also to weaker democracy, because middle class is the basis for democracy, and also several demographic problems. So here I will say that brain drain and immigration is one of the challenges before Europe, and the policies should be discussed on European level, because these discrepancies between low-income countries and high-income countries is a challenge for losing workforce in low-income countries. And also in the previous session was mentioned that when people receive for the same qualification and work higher income, they will prefer another country. But also this has consequences for low-educated people who see no motivation to increase their qualification, because for the low qualified work they could receive better payment. Of course, this is short-term decision, but for low-income strata, the choices are not that much. The second question is internal, and the fact is that the rise of the income levels is almost equal for the middle class and for the low income classes, about 55%, but is highest for the high income group. And this is about the internal inequalities in the society, speaking about a period of economic financial crisis. That means that the risk of this crisis were not distributed properly, and as an effect, the Gini coefficient in Bulgaria raised. So the inequality, internal inequality, is a serious problem. On the third place, I want to say something about the generational discrepancies. Older people have the highest probability of being in the lowest income group and the lowest probability of belonging to the of belonging to the high income group. The highest decrease of the middle income group is from 53% to 47%. And this is really a challenge because in Bulgaria, in contrast to other Western European countries, but also to border countries like Greece, pensioners are really the big losers from the transformation from totalitarian to democratic society. These older people are living mostly in, most of them in villages. So in the regional aspect, the same tendency of decreasing middle class could be seen in the villages. At the opposite end are young people. Their share in the middle class decreased slightly. However, we observe the same increase in the high income groups, so that could be interpreted as an upward social mobility. Yes, through the technological change, the chances for young people to work in IT sector. Bulgaria is a leader in outsourcing sector, so all these young people with good qualification have better chances to work. And when we look at the occupational groups, we see that the highest chances to belong to a high income group is for the specialists working in ICT sector. Then we analyzed also the occupational groups, and we can see that middle class is distributed among different occupational groups. But I believe this should be performed further because give us a chance to see more a concrete picture. And I will finish with one focus on policies. And this is about the need for better work-life balance, because speaking about middle-class families, most of them consist of two partners with good education and prospects to work. So discussing work-life balance is an issue for men and for women, especially for young people. And in this perspective, Bulgaria has good figures and is leading in Europe in terms of childcare facilities and their usage for children between 3 and 6 years. And this is really one option. Seeing the statistics about employment, we see increase of the share of women on the labor market, and also in the share of pensioners working after the pension age.
Thank you very much. I think it's a nice balance to have a sociologist speak after an economist. And I'm delighted that you mentioned this whole issue of work-life balance and childcare, because often there's a gap between the rhetoric of politicians, often EPP politicians who, talk about the benefits of this digital, flexible age of economy. And there's always a difference between that rhetoric and the reality facing most working class families when it comes to childcare and gender equality, etc. Juha, I'll bring you in now for your initial contribution. We've heard from an economist, a sociologist, And
Political
now
economist, the worst of them all.
a political economist, and one who's, I suppose, very actively involved in, you know, political policy formulation and stuff like that. So I'll give you free rein for your initial contribution, and then we can take it from there.
Okay. Good afternoon on my behalf as well. To start, I have to say, like, I'm really puzzled by this whole topic. To me, this seems like one wicked problem in which the interdependencies that we are actually dealing with constantly reveal and create new problems. It's going to be very difficult to find a single solution. And for me, it's even difficult to talk on this issue as a specifically middle-class problem. For the simple reason that, as Arjen and his colleagues so eloquently put in this book, I strongly recommend that you get it in your hands, is that for me, the explanation that income measures actually explain anxieties in the middle class doesn't really seem particularly strong. But then if you take into account the non-income aspects, then it starts to explain a lot more. Because if you think about the income, so the size of the middle class more or less has remained the same. Based on their study, 5 countries exactly the same, 2 countries up, 2 countries down. Nothing in a way dramatic that would explain anxiety so much. Low income growth, that is true, without a question. Yet at the same time, again, as the book shows, the low income growth has applied to all income groups. There are differences, not saying that, but again, only in few countries they're dramatic. In most of them, they are very, very small. And then if you look at taxation, the government policies, that I think can have a more impact, because I believe that the middle classes have felt that they are disproportionately were affected by the financial economic crisis. Yet at the same time, again, if you look, for example, the government share of public expenditure, it hasn't dramatically changed since or during the crisis. Yet at the same time, so you have populist parties going rampant all around the country, and we are finding difficulties to find where this anxiety is actually stemming from. On the other hand, I just checked the latest Eurobarometer where I found data on satisfaction. At the same time, 89% of people are saying that they are very satisfied to live in the country they're living in. And 65% of them throughout the EU, of course there's range, I'm not saying that, say that they're very content with the occupation they currently hold. So like what I'm just saying is that, you know, and why I'm having so much trouble to sort of like try to classify or define the problem we're actually dealing with is the fact that the data to me seems contradictory, and it's very difficult to find a pattern that would actually start to explain what we are witnessing. But moving on from that, I suppose, based on if we use the electoral results of the last few years as an indicator of anxiety, we all have to come to the conclusion that there is a wide-ranging anxiety in the population. There are things that they are not happy with. Then if you start to divide and like look into what people are actually very concerned about right now, there is a very clear distinction. If you, for example, you look at Eurobarometer or some of the surveys we have done, people at the EU level are only concerned about 2 things, immigration and terrorism. The order of those changes per country, but nonetheless, they are always the 2 headline figures. Then if you go to the national level, what people are concerned about, then it becomes cost of living, employment, poverty. Which leads to my first conclusion. For me, it's difficult to find EU-level policy measures for this matter, since people themselves perceive economic policy mainly as a national competence. And that's the first difficulty. For me, like what seems to me has happened is that few unfortunate factors that have happened, a few unfortunate events that have happened at the same time, which have been augmented by the long-lasting trends now of globalization and technological change. One, the so-called ruling elite, call it political, call it economical, financial, lost a very big chunk of their credibility after the 2007 when no one saw what was about to happen. And whilst it happened, it took us a long while to actually understand why it happened and to take measures to actually try to fix the situation. In Europe, I suppose it was made even worse by the fact that for us, at first we thought that this is not our issue. It's an American uber-capitalistic society that is now seeing a boom-bust cycle coming to its end, and we were very slow to see that the problem would hit Europe, and second of all, that our mistakes in building our economic and monetary union would actually make the situation worse and protracted in Europe. Well, then 2015, we saw a clear change. Economy started to recover almost throughout Europe. Since 2014, 8 million new jobs have been created in Europe for the time being. I don't know if this is like a widely sort of shared fact, but like for the time being, there has never been more Europeans at work than currently. But this in itself is not enough to make anyone happy, because one, it's a macro level message, and if you're unemployed, why would you care, kind of a thing. Whilst the moment we sort of got hold of the economic and financial crisis came summer 2015, an asylum seeker crisis. And again, what it did was that it exposed the weakness in a way in our foresight to actually have in place the mechanisms to deal with events that we thought could not happen. Nonetheless, or like, let's put it this way, there were plenty of people who were saying that what happened in 2015 would happen, but there was not enough foresight or willingness to spend the political capital necessary to actually come up with safety mechanisms to make sure that once it happens, we can be in control of the situation. So these two happened, which eroded general trust in our capacity. I mean, like in the capacity of the governments, of the EU, in general, the capacity of experts and the ruling class. On the other hand, augmented, or like this is even augmented by the fact that technology is changing very quickly, and the ones who we used to, like, you know, the ones who used to be in the middle, the accountants, the bank clerks, the yada yada yadas, are now being replaced by technology, or at least their job descriptions are radically changed, and there are fewer of those. And then you have globalization and immigration, which is, without, by default, partially changing the way cities look, partially changing the way our people next to us will look, what our buses look, and what life in general looks like. So what I'm just trying to say is that for me, trying to explain the anxiety through the income aspect or through even the non-income aspects related to the job markets, social mobility, or housing is not necessarily as strong of an explanation for the anxiety we are now seeing than is taking into account the loss of trust because of our own mistakes in the crisis, and second of all, the ongoing fact that we have people concerned on immigration and terrorism, and they feel again that countries are not in charge or in control of the situation. And that to me is a stronger explanation of why people are feeling anxious compared to the income-related issues. And this coming from a political economist, sort of like it really hurts my heart, but I just have to make that argument. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't know whether to be optimistic or pessimistic.
Like, I'm a Finn, like, you know, there are only one kind of Finn.
Yeah. But I think like what you have done is kind of sketch out everything that a lot of European families have experienced over the last 10 years, which is added on top of this, you know, this big debate we have about globalization and technology. You had the financial crisis, the refugee crisis, you know, and this perception, all the Panama leaks, the ruling elite, the tax evasion or the tax management, whichever you want to call it. I just want to ask our sociologist one quick follow-up question, and then I'd like to open it out to the floor. And I'm going to totally abuse my position here. I've got a 3-year-old daughter, and everybody I know, and ourselves, myself and my wife, the two biggest issues that we confront on a daily basis are childcare and education. And why is it important for the middle class? Because it has a direct relevance on how my wife can re-enter the labour market. Very well educated, but it's that kind of difficulty. What struck me was, I think it was the Secretary General of the OECD said that women were the most underutilised asset in the world. And that if the US could increase its labour force participation rate for women, particularly women with children, that like US GDP could, rise by a very significant percentage. Then it just struck me reading about Bulgaria is that perhaps the former communist countries could teach us a thing or two in Western Europe about female labour force participation. So maybe if you could just describe the kind of the situation in Bulgaria.
First of all, Bulgaria has the longest maternity leave. It's 9 months after the birth of the child, and the payment is 90% from the salary before the birth of the child. And this is, of course, in favor of higher educated women. On second place, it's a network of enough childcare facilities, and in Bulgaria, 58% from children in the age 3 to 6 are raised in these facilities, and the average for EU is 47%. Okay. So this is really the institutional past what we transformed. And in fact, the benefits after this first year for raising children are low. And during the crisis, the amount of childcare benefits fall below the minimum wage. But the focus is exactly on childcare facilities. And
are they publicly run, publicly funded?
Both, but most here these figures are only for the publicly run, because yes, there are also private childcare facilities. And yes, in Bulgaria, this is also a socialization process, because the generation of my mother, my generation, and younger generation, this is also something what's important, because this is the role model in which you are socialized. And yes, that are the figures. There is not enough workforce in Europe for qualified jobs, and women and pensioners are the reserve. And here comes the debate about the globalization, technological change, and so on. For older generation, there is a need to work longer because of the low levels of salaries in Bulgaria. On the other hand, the employers are not prepared to train, they are not motivated to train older, let's say 50 plus employees. And one survey done by Eurobarometer 10 years ago showed that discrimination in Bulgaria is reported among people 50 plus, because they are not employed on new jobs. From the same reason, that because employers don't want to train them, and don't want to pay these additional salaries required for older employees. So for me, the question is about lifelong learning, and here Bulgaria stands really very, very low in comparison to work-life balance and childcare. But here for lifelong learning, and this is something important, not thinking all the time about young people. This is also important, because they are very mobile, and they leave very quickly their own country for better work opportunities, but also about older employees.
Great. I think I'll give you one comment in a second. Just I have two comments myself. Is that one is it's interesting how, you know, by Belgian standards, the very generous Bulgarian maternity leave policy probably hasn't had much of an impact on fertility rates in Bulgaria.
Unfortunately not. Unfortunately, the negative tendency is going on, but this is partially due to immigration.
Okay,
and so here is my disagreement for speaking all the time about migration. Yes, migration is an issue from security reasons, but immigration and brain drain is especially acute problem for low-income countries and for Bulgaria, contributing to this really depopulation of whole regions.
Okay, and it's an observation is that when you mentioned the situation about Bulgarian pensioners, it's almost the opposite of what we see in Western Europe, where, you know, many pensioners enjoy very generous, stable, secure pension income, while the younger generation don't know how the system is going to cope. I'm going to give you a quick comment, anything to raise. Arian, if you want to have a quick comment then, and then I'll open it up.
No, I just wanted to reassure everyone that, like, you know, even though as a Finn I can be still optimistic about the future. And if previously I just described the way I see this issue, like how and why the anxieties are there right now, then let me offer 3 options or 3 actions I would take to try to remedy the situation. If you start first with the less practical one, the first thing that what we now talking about, institutions, governments, what they absolutely need to do is to regain the trust of people. And at the same time, we need to come up with the new, as Arian was calling about, it's not about the figures, like nobody cares about 8 million jobs being created since 2014. And like, again, my political economist, my heart is hurting. We need to come up with the big story that we need to sell to actually, one, create the optimism for the people that they don't have to be worried, or so worried at least about their future, and through this try to regain the trust of the people. And then, because if you're trying to sell something, you need to make sure that your message is consistent. You actually do something that makes that message a reality. Follows my second point. What we need to do, absolutely, and what you just mentioned, we need to address, from my point of view, the non-income related issues in the national context. Immigration and brain drain, and you're absolutely right, that is probably something that we have to face and try to find a solution at the EU level. But now if we talk about the non-income related other issues, such as childcare for young families, absolutely needs to be dealt at the national level. Women's participation and women's treatment in the labour market. Like Owen said, I think it was 2 years ago we were in the same panel talking about this same very topic.
I don't think a lot has changed.
And not a lot has changed. And then the last, but not the, and basically maybe from my point of view, the most important aspect, often overlooked, is what you mentioned about adult education and training. The thing is, you know, like in those countries in which the costs borne by the employer because of training their employees are not fully tax deductible, they will have to make them. But again, it's a national issue. Because the thing is, with new technologies, it doesn't have to lead to replacement of people or employees by new technology or by new machinery. Because also that doesn't necessarily lead to increase in production, because productivity. Because what we have seen over the time, and especially with IT technology, is that we were expecting a huge jump in productivity, which wasn't simply there, for the simple reason that, you know, it wasn't adopted necessarily quickly enough, or we just didn't actually learn to use it in the best possible way. And this is the thing, like if we really want to take the advantage of the new technologies, we need to augment the skills of the existing labor force, which means that we actually need to invest for the labor force. And here is a big difference between the European model at least, like let's say you can, of course, divide Europe in a number of different ways, but if we take the continental single social market economy model in which you have a strong representation of employees in the boards and yada, 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 that the employees actually are part of the company. This will have to be also there in the future, and we actually need to invest a lot more in these people, and I believe that the public sector has a very strong role to have in this situation. And then the second thing, so if we first try to come up with a new idea that we're selling, regaining the trust. The trust can be regained best by actually taking these actions and offering the remedy for the situation. So first, let's address the non-income related issues I just mentioned. Of course, housing is also one of them, but I'm not going to give you a mile-long list because that basically is the situation. The third point is that we need to address the main concerns of people right now. And essentially, those will then be whether it is terrorism and security, whether it is immigration, whether it's about reassuring people of their future, of their culture. And also what we shouldn't really forget is that we really need to rebuild the communities in the sense of like integrating the people living together. This is something that is often forgotten. And I know that it's often like a topic considered a very much a topic of the Green Party or the Left Party, yada, yada, yada. But for God's sakes, we are the Christian Democrats. We are meant to be the community party, the one who believe in strong family, a strong community. The fact that there are new people coming into our communities will have to also mean that we don't think or act as if the community there is the only community existing and whoever came does not have access to it. These things are not easy to solve. But if we want to, from my point of view, address these anxieties, big idea, regain trust through addressing non-income related issues and the main concerns of the day.
Cool, thank you, Juha.
So that's the positive Finn speaking.
Yes, good. Even if basic income is no longer on the agenda in Finland, I hear. Arjen, yeah, any quick comments, couple of minutes, and then I'll open it up?
Because the wonderful thing is that we're also having a follow-up project with the Martens Centre also about this. And Juha, I'd like to use your input there. I think what you're saying is just, if it was a sermon, I would say amen. I don't know if people relate to that, but I went to Corsica on holiday, and then I thought, I'm an economist. Let's go as a mystery shopper. Let's see, what's the economy of Corsica like? I mean, like if I have 1 hour to spend. So I Googled for 15 minutes. I found a document from the European Commission about the economy of Corsica. The word tourism was not mentioned in this piece. I was completely surprised. So when I was there, it turns out like there was a baptism ceremony where the mafia killed each other. And secondly, they banned these campers. That was also a regulation that when I was there. So I thought, well, this is. I am an economist, but this is really the top-down thing, like the economic reasoning that you see in a lot of European Commission things, like the European semester, or what are these things called? I find it very technical, and I'm a financial economist, and it drains all my energy if I read about that. And that's Europe. Okay, that's Europe. So then we go to the Netherlands. What did the government do? There was a big debate yesterday. The government survived. They abolished dividend tax, which mostly benefits multinationals.
So it was a tax on share dividends.
Yeah, we have a dividend tax. It was abolished. Nobody knows why. It costs 1.4 billion euros per year, the government. And the Ministry of Finance had advised against it.
The Financial Times next week will tell you why.
Yeah, and the thing is that that's a national example of, I think, where this economic reasoning is failing because people have no clue about our economic system. I mean, I understand that. I also don't know what the economic system is. It's free, that's good, but you start to doubt whether this works or whether there is like an elite which turns the knobs. And this, of course, it sounds maybe like a radical left-wing narrative, but it seems to be confirmed in a lot of things that you see in practice, and that's really bad. So there was this growth narrative a long time, and growth is good, and it leads to jobs. But now we find out it can crash very badly. You find out that other people also want it, so you get immigration and stuff, and it might not benefit us that much because you get a new style of living. You now have dual earners. You have more stress. So I think people did learn something about the economy, but that's these three things. And then they say, well, what's the government for? And I think that this point of well, I'm from the Christian Democrats, I think that is a wonderful tradition to say, like the bonum commune from Aquinas, is like living well together, also with new people, if they are allowed in. It's a big thing, and then you need to tell a story, a narrative about that. And I think that is maybe the book. I don't know if you learned this from the book, but I see the book as like this documenting this turning point. Like a lot of people are, there was gains and losses, but what do we do now? That's what I'm thinking about. And I think for economists, and especially because you see this nationally in Europe, I wonder whether a lot of people realize this, that this is the case. Because the narrative keeps on being repeated in terms of the old terms. And well, maybe let's hear from the audience what they think about it.
Okay, I'll open it up for questions. We've got one here and one at the back then. We'll go with those two and we'll see where we are then.
You said, let's sell a new story. My provocative question for all of the panelists, in the story should the story not be focusing on, when the title is holding the center, restoring the center, that the value of the human being shouldn't be monetized. Everything is monetized. Even the human being is monetized. It's depending on how money you have, on what scale of the ladder you are. And this is, if this continues, nothing will change on this planet, because this is ruling the world. This is a very, very easy question.
Okay, thank you. And just the lady at the back.
Sorry. I have a question for all three members of the panel. You mentioned the Eurobarometer, anyway, two of you mentioned it. But in my opinion, it's not very reliable. One of the organizations linked to the Martens Centre even organized recently a symposium about that, because in that country they created their own Eurobarometer opinion polls because they do not trust it. One of the problems of it is that it's a face-to-face interviews. So the person who asks the questions can influence the person who responds. And the second thing is, some years ago I tried to get the questions they asked. I just wanted to see what the questions were in the different languages. For instance, if you ask, do you like the European Union? Maybe in another country they ask, do you like Europe? Which in most countries has a different feeling. But they refuse to give me it, which makes the distrust even larger, of course. Maybe you have some other opinions about it.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions? Yeah, one more here.
I'm not an expert to the extent you are, but I read a number of publications on the issue of a middle class, and I'm wondering whether you are not being a bit too optimistic about what's happening across the whole world when you look at the famous elephant graph from the Branko Milanovic. You can see that on the one hand, you have 2 billion people lifted out of poverty in China, but you have income flattening or decline in the richer Western countries. Hence phenomenon, some say, like Trump, Brexit, huge gains of anti-establishment party, luckily not sufficient to gain enough traction last year in several votes, but let's see what happens in the next few years. The increase of precarious jobs, the loss of stability in the Western middle class. Shouldn't we be more worried?
Yeah, okay, thank you. I'll work from left to right. So, Arjen.
I'll take the elephant in the room. Yeah. I think that is a very good question. I think this is also the kind of painful point where there's some kind of solution, but maybe we do not like the solution, which is like this elephant trunk. in my words, means like you can get a lot of people to become middle income in China, maybe in new countries that join the EU, and a lot of people there will be really happy. And some, let's say, lower middle class families existing in these countries will be very unhappy because they feel like they are competing with the Chinese laborer. What's the solution? Well, to be much more careful in doing these deals. But that means that you take a step back in your speed of globalization. And then you say, well, are the interests of the people we have here weighs more heavily than the interests of people somewhere else? And something like this, I think you have to make a statement about it. It used to be very easy, I think, in the 80s and 90s, like all trade is good. And because of China, it worked. We got all these cheap toys and cheap clothes, and it was great for everybody. But now we see that it doesn't work anymore. And then to actually say out loud, like, you know, we're going to slow this process down, I think means that morality has a local component, if you want to say it very abstract. Like the people we care for here are for us more important than other groups of people. And I don't know if politicians want to say that, or maybe this is also the rise of populism.
And especially
yeah.
China did not reward us with
yeah.
political liberalization, which was
exactly.
a trade-off for...
yeah, it seems to be asymmetric. Yeah, and I have a Portuguese colleague at university who still gets really angry. Well, Portuguese, maybe they can have a lot of emotions, which is wonderful. He's still angry about the shoe factories in Portugal, which all went bankrupt because of the deal with China. So these are feelings that people have, and maybe we should listen to it.
Yeah.
That's, I think, a point.
I think it's a valid point. You can take it. We had the first question was about, you know, the modern system, everything, everybody's monetized.
Oh, yeah.
The second question was specifically on Eurobarometer, and the third was about being too optimistic.
Yes. I believe that income perspective is very important, and inequality measured by Gini coefficient is important to be followed and to be studied. And there are different measures for the society. Gini inequality is one of them. Trust to institutions, general trust to unknown others in the both dimensions is the other, happiness is the third. So all this is important to measure how healthy is the society, how happy people living in the society are. So the rising inequality is an issue, and I'm sure that inequality should be discussed by politicians from the European People's Party. It shouldn't be left only to the left parties. That's a big issue, and even in my country, speaking about inequalities, you will receive immediately the label you are left. And I am not left. I am following methodological individualism. I am for the chances of people to compete, to broaden their chances. To choose what they want to work, where to live, and so on. But inequality is an important measurement, and the question is how to reduce inequalities. And my answer is through additional education, training, through creation of good jobs. And one colleague asked me in the afternoon, what does it mean, good jobs? And I feel this is important question. Yes, this is a well-paid job, but this is also a job giving you the feeling that you are working what you want to work, and not that you are forced to accept every work because of this financial situation. And we just finished a year ago one comparative employer survey in Switzerland, Norway, Bulgaria, and Greece. And that survey shows that not every job is good, because in long term, by selecting, by recruiting, employers don't look very well on records in the CV of bad jobs. Just jobs which are not contributing to the qualification of the employee. So this is my message: creation of good jobs, more jobs, and training, and involving employers in the debate. Because between employers and employees often could be seen misunderstandings. For example, for young people, job hopping is something good. They think with every additional job, we earn more experience. But that's not the point of view of employers who invest in the additional training of young and of the recruitment of new people. So, and the third question about Eurobarometer and the quality of the data. I'm convinced supporter of pan-European comparative surveys, and I'm working very often with the European Social Survey and with SHARE. This is the survey on health and aging, and the quality is really very high. There are different procedures on which you could check the quality of all these surveys.
Okay. You have. Sure, maybe that's a discussion we can have after this debate. Juha, any comments on those questions or?
Yeah, I can make a short comment on all of them. Like the first one to the gentleman, the second row, about like monetization of everything. No, I fully agree with you. The second thing is it doesn't even work, because like now we are following mostly, well, not necessarily mostly, but GDP is the number one indicator we're following. But at the same time, GDP doesn't really include everything, and it actually excludes a huge chunk of, for example, work carried out in the society. So I agree with you on that. The only thing, but I know that I shouldn't say this, but I still want to say it.
Oh, there it comes.
It's about the new story that, for the time being, and luckily you didn't ask, but I'm going to expose my ignorance nonetheless, that I don't really yet have a clear idea what that new story would be and how we will sell it. But it might actually be that will be a story that will be formulated through the fact that we will do and address the non-income issues and the most important issues of the day. And through those actions, we will actually create the story, and not, so the actions will create the story will not create the actions. But will this happen? We'll see in the upcoming future. But regarding the income flatlining, and that question on Brexit and Trump and the effect of that. First, like, based on the data, if you look at, for example, the income data on like who voted for Trump, who voted for Brexit, I think it's a wrong conclusion to say that it was disproportionately poor people and that they created Trump and they created Brexit. Slightly more maybe, but at the same time, if you look at Trump, for example, he clearly carried white college-educated women after everything he said. He clearly carried high-income white people in general, clear majority. If you look at Brexit, it's like it was, what would I say, a revolution against an elite driven by an elite itself, which sounds a bit funny, but that's the way I see it. Yes, in Northern England, for example, there was more people voting for it, but at the same time, at least based on the studies I've seen that I've tried to come up with models to explain the vote on Brexit, that income is not one of the main factors. That was more explained by their stance. First of all, the level of education. You can say that strongly correlates with income, but nonetheless, education was one of the key things. And second was their opinion on immigration And again, we come down to this topic. And then in general of this thing, that, you know, like how we see flatlining in the West, like I suppose, like theoretically speaking, what we are seeing, and then what you were saying, that, you know, like should we be competing with the Chinese? The unfortunate fact is that to a large extent we are. And through that, what we are basically seeing is that our wages are not increasing because our competitiveness does not allow us to really radically increase the wages, and hence we are basically flatlining to give time for the Chinese and the Indians and for other emerging economies to actually sort of get to our level, because that is basically where we are. We are in a competition, not on all sectors, because in certain sectors we are still at the very high end of the added value of the sort of like supply chain, but especially in those in which we are in the middle, like you know, we have faced now competition from China for many years. And the scary thing is, what I find very, very worrisome is the recent reports, for example, that China is pulling ahead in terms of investment into artificial intelligence and also applications of it. Because thereafter, now if we have a competitive advantage to technological advantage, we can still justify the higher wages we have compared to our competitor regions, in this way. If we lose that edge, then what do we do? And that's the whole thing. And that's why the main thing what I'm very concerned about is the fact that the investment levels in Europe are still, after many years of the crisis, lower than they were beforehand. Yes, you can make a justified argument that beforehand they were too high. Nonetheless, now they're still several percentage points below what they used to be. And this is what really, really concerns me. And the distribution effect you just mentioned, or you mentioned in terms of the Portuguese shoe factories, we had the same thing in Finland. We had a huge garment industry, and then when the Soviet Union collapsed, the next day basically we closed the lights because there wasn't anything anymore. Just like the labor simply like couldn't compete in terms of price and productivity and that equation. Now in the future, since the competition is getting more fierce and the other parts of the world are getting more and more advanced or catching us or even going further, we really need to pay attention to the distribution effects. And that even if at macro level we really win from a trade deal, and this is not an argument not to make the trade deals, because I think we need to make them, or we are just bound to slowly wither in importance. But politically speaking, to try to avoid these anxieties, we really need to make sure that we actually then invest again in actual education, and we treat those people who lose their livelihood with dignity and respect, meaning in this case, actually with hard cash, go back to college to find yourself on your future, so to say. It sounds harsh, but I don't find any other alternative to it.
Can I answer to that story question? One thing. So what do you think of? What do you think of? I see Donald Trump as someone who we can learn a lot from, because he experiments. He just talks off the cuff for 1.5 hours. You read that in Fire and Fury. What a wonderful book! It's like the court of Henry VIII. And if something works, then the audience starts clapping and they stand up. And then he finds that, oh, this works. So he keeps on ranting about it. So he's kind of, it's like natural selection of ideas.
True.
And he has some, and if you think about this election, I mean, apart from the guy himself, it was like, I'll close the border and I'll open the coal mines. And everybody knew it. So that's a kind of political communication. If you think about political ideas, if I say we need to have a technology strategy for Europe, I don't think any voter will vote for it.
No. I think we have tried already.
Yeah, but maybe like on national level, if you say free childcare or a fixed rate childcare, that is something. I mean, it has a whole world of ideas behind it, and I think that's what you can learn. And then you can say, and I think that's the whole point with policymakers and economists. They will say, yeah, but it has disadvantages. There's a dead weight loss, stuff like that. And then you think, but then you can say nothing, and you can just sit waiting until the populists come. And they say, close the border, free childcare, which is something I think happens.
But
why not be bold? But it's a national thing.
Yeah, but actually just Yes, I admit I am obsessed with
Yeah.
childcare. The
But dual earner is a real thing. That
It
is
is
what everybody mentions.
Owen, how many child are you planning of having? If I may ask?
I just have one, and one is definitely enough. I'm afraid you can't count on me to counter the demographic
I'm
challenge.
not sure if it influences the birth rate, though. But okay.
No, but my
Empirically.
point is that
Yeah.
the academic literature is quite clear in that investment in high quality, accessible childcare benefits society, benefits the child, benefits the parents, but also more importantly can play a key role in helping kids from disadvantaged backgrounds in terms of having that access. And I think what's important is that maybe as the EPP we frame it a little differently in that we don't say, oh, we should have, you know, this level of childcare for everybody everywhere. What we should say is that the EPP, you know, given our history with the social market economy, should be the party that says, you know, parents should have a choice if they want, if the woman, and we need to, of course.
Although it might, I would see it as a national thing. I don't know if
It
this
is a national thing, yeah.
I don't know if people would like EPP.
Exactly.
In fact, if I would say an EPP subject, it might be, well, watch out for all this free trade stuff.
Yeah.
In the sense that, like Danny Roderick says, like because like there are no tariffs in Europe, there are still some borders for free travel of people and firms. That's the point.
Services and everything.
Yeah, so you get for freedoms, and you can work on getting these thresholds still lower. But then Roderick shows that the disruption you cause is 50 times larger than the benefits. So maybe that's why one of these provocative questions in the book as well. Maybe you should say, no, let's maybe spend less effort on internal markets and more on where we should do stuff, like on the outside borders, on trade agreements as a block. But I think this is also Federico's essay a bit, what it's saying. So he has a point.
Yeah, it's true.
And it's something you could sell by saying Europe will stop doing, I don't know, something.
Okay, that's a big issue. I'm afraid.
Agricultural policy, I know. I mean,
it's been a long day. I'm afraid to even go near that issue. Any more questions, Jakob? Okay, we'll take one more question, and then I have a question I need to ask as well.
Let me guess, about childcare.
No, this one is not about childcare.
Madam Stoilova, I would like to follow up on one statement you said, and it particularly kind of struck me because I'm concerned with that as a young person. You said about young people that we strive towards job hopping, and I would really like to starkly disagree with that, and really like to say that this is a very touchy topic to me personally also, and to my surroundings, and particularly problematic is that what I see around with young people is that we do not strive towards job hopping. We would like some security in the job market, but we're presented constantly with exactly what you said. This is an opportunity for you. Take it. Take this internship, that internship. Go ahead. But how would you address people who actually want job security, young people who want job security and cannot get it in this world? Can you follow up on that, please?
Yes. What I said is based on this employer survey, and within the survey it was an experiment, vignette experiment. Recruiters are asked to compare different CVs, and the conclusion was that unemployment record in the CV is seen less negatively than the frequent change of a job. And on the other hand, we performed interviews with young people, and in some of them, not in all of them, we saw, of course, better educated young people. They have more chances to choose, and we saw this explanation. Frequent change of job is helping me to have additional experience and to find out the better job. So this is one possible misunderstanding between employers and young people. I agree with you that the young generation now faces lower job security compared to my generation. Even now in Bulgaria, most of the employment contracts are permanent, with lower pay, but they are permanent and they are stable. And it's relatively difficult for younger people to reach this status, especially in public sphere or in science.
I don't want a lifelong contract. I want 2 or 3 years. It's a problem to get nowadays.
Yeah. Any other comments before I?
Well, you can ask your question.
Yes.
You're sitting on it.
My question, I've been wanting to ask this since the start, is you're back in your office tomorrow, the phone rings, you get a call from the Parliament to say, come back to Brussels, we need you to advise the EPP on real concrete policies that we can sell at the next election, particularly for the middle class. You know, particularly, not just for the middle class, but for, I think the Irish Prime Minister borrowed it from Sarkozy when he said, you know, for the people who get up early every morning, work hard, have to race back to collect their kids. That's a childcare issue. But, Arian, I'll go with you first.
Oh, man.
Should it be, as you said, somebody told me yesterday, what's the most popular policy of the EU, you know, from the last mandate? And, you know, he said it was roaming.
Roaming?
Oh, roaming, okay, the elimination of roaming. Yeah. If you're talking about what affects people day to day, you know, so rather than talking about, you know, we need to reduce the Gini coefficient, which of course is, you know, vitally important. What can we do to channel this into like a political campaign? Or can we do anything?
I can think of something that people will be happy with. And I don't know. I think that is the idea, like we will stop being the nanny of other economies. So the idea of that, because a lot of people have this impression that the European Commission, the European Central Bank is busy with Greece and Spain and Italy, figuring out what to do and how to do it. And everybody thinks, well, but if the banks fail there, then probably we'll have to pay for it. The kind of populist sentiment, but there is maybe a grain of truth in it, because if the banks fail, then there's a big impact on the euro. So if the European Commission would say, you know, we're going to let each country decide its own future a bit more than we did. I think people would be happy with that.
Okay, I like that one actually. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I'm not sure how.
Responsibility is an important word also for Christian Democrats.
It is.
And
but I suppose people would argue that to get to that point, a lot of other stuff needs to be done in terms of like completing banking union and separating the banks from the states and all this.
Exactly, but you don't have to bother people with the details.
Yes.
That's what you learned from Trump. You just throw in a curveball and then you figure out what to do when you let the civil servants and you are advice on how to actually do it. Isn't it? Yeah, and you do it by Twitter.
Okay.
Then you do the exact opposite.
You figure out what to do, but at least the people will understand that you hear them. So if you just say, I hear your problems, but then there doesn't come a solution, that's a strange kind of political communication. I think the answer is the proof that you are listening.
Let me, just before I come to you, let me frame it a little bit better maybe, is that when people ask me around in the bubble in Brussels, you know, what kind of issues are you working on and stuff? And I tell them, like, you know, we're doing a lot of, socioeconomic, you know, stuff. They go, oh, I didn't know that the EPP did that sort of thing. Because, in a sense, the political debate on these issues has been captured by the left a long time ago, which is kind of, it's sad because the EPP is the party of, you know, personal responsibility and the social market economy and stuff. So in that context, I suppose, like you were saying earlier about the we need to come up with this new narrative and this new story. So I suppose with specific regards to the middle class, I know you're involved in the early preparation and stuff. Is there any kind of ideas that are coalescing that might lead to something maybe?
Yeah. And now, you know, I have to question my solution that I gave because I thought it was there. But
There it goes.
the two things. The first one in terms of, again, like the middle class and their concern about the non-income related issues. Cost of living. That we understand your fear of increasing cost of living, and we will do something about it.
Yeah.
And that's something about it, you can be far more specific if you want to, but since you were saying let's not bother people with details, to be frank,
the details won't fit on a poster.
the details will not fit on the posters. But like I think this is then the big socio-economic issue for us, because like if you I need to be frank with the fact that.
But can Europe do anything there?
Yeah, that European Union itself. Well, okay, I know that there are competing schools of thought, but since they are not present, mine is the dominant one. This school of thought thinks that seriously, for example, childcare is one of the issues that are like we can have these like grand ideas as we have like equality between sexes. That is there. That's in the treaties. That's in our European legislation. But then, of course, the nitty-gritty implementation, how you apply it to particular situations, that will need to be done by the national politicians and, in the last instance, by the national courts. So, like, as much as I would love to say that, like, we would be the party that will give you the option of having whatever way you want your quality childcare, I would love to be in a position to say that, but I don't think it is particularly honest. The same thing in terms of housing. Again, that's one of the big things that normally tend to be at the regional level, if not at the local or city level. Because like we just need more houses if we need to solve the housing issue. That's as simple as it is. But of course, the ones who own the houses, they don't want more houses because then it means that their value will drop. It's a relatively simple equation, but okay, how do you find the solution for it? So for me, like the main thing is that in terms of cost of living, what can we in practice do? And for me, like I see nowadays, I have to be honest, I didn't necessarily see it always that way, the single market as a means for reducing the cost of living. Because the fact that you have the single market and you have the energy union, and again, let's not get to the nitty-gritty, but those things will bring the prices down, and that is what we want. Because then people will have more of their disposable income for other things that will give them more satisfaction instead of mere existence. That would be the first thing. Then, and that's again on the non-income related stuff. Then on the main concerns of the people right now, terrorism and immigration. Those are the two things like we have to deliver. And on immigration, Frontex, so that the European Coastal and Border Guards, that they actually become proper agency with proper funding and resources. So let's use a Trumpist line. I don't know.
Build a wall.
No. Like, 5 times the resources for 10 times the resources, whatever it is, the X times the resources. Because like you need to address people's concern on this. And this doesn't mean, and we need to be extremely clear on this matter, that we are not for closing of borders. We are for being in control of borders and of the situation. We are not against immigration or immigrants. We are against uncontrolled immigration. That's as simple as it is. And that should be the dividing line between us and the populist. Okay. And I think, like on this one, we can also differentiate us from the socialists and from the Greens and the liberals. And on just terrorism,
1 minute. Yeah.
on terrorism, I think there is a lot more we can do. What really bothers me about this whole discussion on terrorism is that one, no one is talking about the root causes, which you can also see in the European neighborhood. Second, we talk about how easy it is for terrorists to move from one country to another because of Schengen. That's all fine. So what's the solution? Let's close Schengen. I was like, no, that's not the solution. If the problems are cross-border, then we need to find solutions that are cross-border. You need to find agencies, or you need to really make it so that the agencies we have already, that bloody hell, they can actually work more like seamlessly in all the other countries. Because after all, terrorism shouldn't really be an issue like, do I have the competence to work in Belgium if I'm German, or like Germany, Netherlands? I don't know. I understand it's a very, very sensitive issue, but for God's sakes, cross-border issues will require cross-border solutions.
Thank you, Juha. Okay, we've just got about a couple of minutes, but I wanted to give the last word to our sociologists, because sometimes when I'm wandering around Brussels, I think if we had a few more sociologists in Brussels, maybe we'd understand things a bit more. And women sociologists.
Yes, I will not speak about people, but I will try to be more precise, because young people have certain problems and challenges, and people 50 plus have another. And that's what is my message, to have specific groups and to address policies to these specific groups. For example, housing. In Bulgaria, 90% of people own their apartment. The problem is with older people, with pensioners. They own their houses, but they don't have the pensions and the resources to pay for the heating, for renovation of this. So we have really degradation of housing. And through European funding was tried to implement an energy effective housings. But the problem was that the decision was to take 100% the payment for this energy effectivity, and in fact, very small percent of people received the opportunity to utilize this policy. So the second advice would be to evaluate each policy, what is the effect of the middle, of the poor, and of the rich parts of society. Another example is agrarian policy, which in Bulgaria created really millionaires through these subsidies for cultures which require machine, not this hand work. And on this way, not middle class, not low income strata, but again the high income groups were beneficiaries of this. The same example I could give in the energy sector with this alternative energy sources. Again, not middle and small enterprises, but very big enterprises received the opportunity to for these subsidies. And to sum up, every policy, in my view, should be evaluated on its effect on middle and on low-income groups. With public funding should be really supported smaller and weaker parts of the society.
Yep. Okay, thank you very much. I want to thank everybody. It's been a long day. Thank you for staying and contributing. Thanks to my speakers for taking time. Thanks to Arian and the CDA. I'm not really going to sum it up, because actually the book is kind of a start to draw out the issues. So it's kind of like an ongoing process. My one takeaway from this, two takeaways from this discussion is that the book is excellent. Please take a copy outside. And second is that childcare, affordable and accessible childcare, is very important. Thank you very much.